NASCAR may remove the charter system if they lose a lawsuit against 2311 in Front Row Motorsports. 2311 Racing is expected to run a fourth part-time entry in 2025, and NASCAR is also interested in rotating the championship finale in the future. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them straight into those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just show them straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2025 Martin's Potato Roll scheme that we'll see at Atlanta next week. Scheme looks alright in my opinion. Do like the colors overall, do like the yellow, but I think there's also a little bit of mismatching on this scheme as well. It could definitely be better, but it's not a bad paint scheme, to be honest with you. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Jeb Burton's 2025 Golden Corral scheme that we'll see in select races in 2025, including the Xfinity Series race this weekend at Daytona. Looks very similar to the scheme from 2024. The colors look alright. I like the white background. I like the orange background as well. It's a solid looking paint scheme, and I'm definitely looking forward to see on the racetrack in 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Horizon Hobby. As it was announced earlier this afternoon that Horizon Hobby will sponsor Zane Smith for 2 races in 2025. Horizon Hobby's been sponsoring the Front Row Motorsports organization since I believe 2022 or 2021. This will be the 4th year that they have worked with Front Row Motorsports. They're sponsoring less races. I've heard some stuff around the Horizon Hobby brand that's not really good at the moment, but it's good to see it'll be once again working with Front Row Motorsports in 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Prime. Now, if you were on Instagram earlier today, you probably saw that Kyle Larson was showing some of the Prime Energy or the Prime bottles to his young kids. And some of his kids, I think Owen and his youngest kid, I believe, were really looking at it and they really loved it. And Logan Paul actually commented on it and they're interested, and it sounds like we may be getting a Prime Energy car in the not-so-distant future. Kyle Larson is working with Prime currently at the moment. He has an endorsement deal with them with their drinks. He's the first NASCAR and racing driver to be associated with the Prime company. And I think it'd be really cool to see the company that's owned by Logan Paul KSI get the opportunity to work with Kyle Larson and sponsor a car. I made that prediction last year, and I think the fact you're talking about it, I do think it's going to come true. So this is really exciting news to hear. I really hope we do get a Prime NASCAR Cup car at some point this year, or even Xfinity car if he does run some Xfinity races, which we know Hendrick is going to run in the Xfinity Series in 2025. This is really exciting stuff nonetheless, and glad to see that we may be getting a Prime car in the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Toyota. As there was reported by Adam Stern yesterday that Toyota has released an ad called the Big Three. This is going to be part of an ad campaign that Toyota is going to be doing throughout the 2025 season. They're going to have 9 different ads throughout the year, and this ad is going to go through the first few races of 2025, including this weekend at Daytona International Speedway. Toyota has put a lot of money into the sport. They've invested a lot in the sport, and they continue to want to grow the sport in a really, really big way, and they've put more money than any other manufacturer out there. I thought the ad was really, really entertaining. I thought it was a really, really good one, and it's good to see that Toyota continues to work with the sport and continues to want to grow the sport in a way. Really exciting, great stuff overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about J.J. Yeley. As it was announced yesterday morning that J.J. Yeley will drive the 29 for RSS Racing this weekend at Daytona International Speedway. This will be the first of a few select Xfinity Series starts that he's expected to make in 2025. Unfortunately, was not able to make the Daytona 500 this year, but at least he'll have the opportunity to run some select Xfinity Series races, including this weekend. I think that he's going to have a decent chance. J.J. Yeley's become a pretty solid driver over the course of the last decade or so, and it's good he's getting an opportunity with the RSS Racing Group this weekend at Daytona. I do think he's going to be pretty strong. I do think he'll be very, very competitive this weekend for sure, and I do expect that J.J. Yeley and the RSS Racing team are going to have some good pace and speed. We'll see what it can do, and we'll see if J.J. Yeley can be fast and super competitive this weekend at Daytona International Speedway with the RSS Racing team. Of course, they got to make the show, and weather is in the forecast for tomorrow. I'm not sure what the points are currently at the moment for the 29 car at this time. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mason Maggio. As it was confirmed a couple days ago that Mason Maggio will drive the 4 for Hettinger Racing this weekend at Daytona International Speedway. Hettinger Racing was formerly Brett Holmes Racing. They bought up a lot of the Brett Holmes Racing assets in 2024, and this is going to be a decent opportunity for Mason Maggio, as of course Brett Moffitt drove this car or truck at the end of last year. I thought Brett Moffitt might have been the driver behind the wheel, but Mason is a very solid young driver. He's shown some flashes with Viridian Motorsports, and he's shown flashes at times in the Xfinity Series as well. I think if the equipment is good enough, I think that Mason does have a solid chance and opportunity to be very, very competitive and show some good speed this weekend. It's a great opportunity to work with the Hettinger Racing organization in 2025. And like I said, I do think he's got a solid chance and a strong opportunity to definitely be competitive. We'll see what he can do this weekend at Daytona. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about RCR. As RCR has announced multiple leadership changes going into the remainder of 2025. First, Mike Verlander has been named the new president of Richard Childress Racing, while Tori Galita, who was the president of Richard Childress Racing, has been promoted to vice chairman of the organization. Mike Verlander, for a long time, I believe, had been working over at Stewart Haas Racing, but a couple years ago, he moved into working with Richard Childress Racing, and he's been there over the course of the last couple years. And he's going to get the opportunity to make some of the executive decisions as well. And I think Tori Galita being moved up to vice chairman, I think that's a really good move for the program. RCR really struggled in 2024, and they really had a bad season. Since about the middle of 2023, they've been taking major steps backwards. So if this change can come into play and really help the program grow, that's going to be the most important thing for the team. So really exciting stuff for sure, and glad to see that Mike Verlander and Tori Galita have been announced in new executive positions. Hopefully that these people can really help Richard Childress Racing grow. I think they've got a chance and opportunity to really do that. We'll see what they can do this year in 2025 as RCR is trying to keep Kyle Busch around. If they can run well, Kyle Busch might stick around for the long term. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Briscoe. Now, a couple of nights ago, we had Daytona 500 qualifying, and Chase Briscoe was able to win the pole for the Daytona 500. A couple accomplishments happened with that. Number one, it's the first pole for a Toyota for the Daytona 500, but it's also the first pole for Joe Gibbs Racing, and only the second time in Joe Gibbs Racing history they have won the pole. The last time that happened was 1998 when Bobby Labonte won the pole. A little bit of fact there. You know who won the Daytona 500 in 1998? That was Dale Sr. So if you're a Kyle Busch fan, you probably should be really happy at the moment right now, considering Kyle Busch did show some really good pace and speed during the duels earlier this evening. But I do think that Chase Briscoe really showed some speed, and I think that Briscoe starting off on a really strong note, and to see he was able to win the pole for Daytona for a Toyota nonetheless is absolutely shocking. But I think it's great to see that Chase Briscoe was able to win the pole, and I think it's huge for Toyota as they won their first ever pole for the Daytona 500. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chevy. As earlier today, Chevrolet revealed the new EV Blazer, the EVSS Blazer I should say, that will be used for demonstrations for the EV vehicle for NASCAR starting in 2025. They're also going to be using a new pace car as well that will be used during the Daytona 500 as well. And it's going to be based a little bit on the Camaro, even though it sounds like according to Jim, the people that run over there at Chevy, Jim Campbell does a lot of stuff with GM. He did say they're still going to be using the Camaro for the next couple of years. We don't know what the future Chevrolet is. They're working on some car apparently for the future. This could have been that project. We don't know at this point. But I do think in regards to Chevrolet, I think that they're going to be around at least for the foreseeable future. Now, it is just a demonstration car. It's not a car that's going to be used on track anytime soon. NASCAR is not going to be going over toward EV anytime soon. Well, so while I do understand a concern from a lot of people on this front and aspect, I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit when we see stuff like this and not jump the gun really quickly. Again, I completely understand why some fans are frustrated and upset with this new seeing an EV Blazer, but at the same time, at this moment, they're not using a new car currently at the moment. They're not changing it up. They're just showing it as a demonstration car for the event. And now we're going ahead on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about BJ McLeod. BJ McLeod did reveal a couple days ago during Daytona Media Day, speaking to Steven Tarana from CBS Sports, he revealed that he could be running some Cup Series races in 2025 outside of the Daytona 500. According to what he said, he has talked to Carl Long about making more starts with that organization in 2025. Now, BJ McLeod did make some select starts last year with Live Fast Motorsports. They're going to run all the super speedway races outside of Daytona 500, as unfortunately they failed to qualify for the Daytona 500. But BJ McLeod is expected to run all the other super speedway races behind the wheel. They're not expected to get a driver from the Xfinity Series to get behind the wheel of that car. But I think it'd be really cool to see him drive for MBM Motorsports, or Garage 66, I should say, in the NASCAR Cup Series. I think that BJ will be solid this year. I think BJ is a better driver than people give him credit for. He's done some good stuff. He could have driven for Junior Motorsports not too long ago, going back to 2021, and Michael Annett got injured. But I think seeing BJ being considered for the Carl Long's team, the Garage 66 entry that Chandler Smith drove earlier tonight during the duels, I think that's really, really cool to see. So I'm really intrigued to see what races BJ could drive the car, because we know Garage 66 is going to drive a lot of races, not every single event, but they're going to be in a majority of races in 2025. We're going to see him run quite a few events, and we'll see what events they do truly end up doing in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Formula One. There was a bombshell report that came out from Adam Stern early this evening that ESPN is getting out of the F1 business. Briscoe executives say this series will not renew for 2026, meaning that Formula One will be looking for a new media company to work with in 2026. There's been a lot of rumors and speculation that there was going to be a new media partner coming in for Formula One headed into 2026. But to see that this is absolutely happening is wild. Formula One has been on ESPN since 2018. Prior to that, it's in 2017 and back to like 2011 and 12, it was on NBC and the NBC Sports Network. They had F1 races on there. Lee Diffie called a lot of those races along with David Hobbs. But now they've had it on ESPN with Sky Sports Skycasting. But because of Formula One's growth in the United States, I think that's a pretty big reason why they're wanting the money to be increased. And I don't think ESPN is willing to pay for that kind of money at this point. So now my question is, where could Formula One end up going? My best guess currently at the moment is Netflix. There's been a lot of chatter that Netflix is in the running to pick up the rights for the Formula One coverage headed into 2026. And I think it's very likely that you're going to see Formula One races headed over there in 2026, because we know that Netflix has been updating their sports stuff. Yes, they had issues with the Mike Tyson and Jake Paul fight, but they've been covering NFL games in the last year or so. And they were also doing WWE events, and I haven't really heard any issues around the live streams that have gone on there as well. So I think when you look at it, I think it's going to end up on Netflix. I don't see it going to Fox. I don't see it going back to NBC. I don't see it going to CBS especially. I think most likely you're going to see it end up on the Netflix broadcast. So it's probably going to be behind a little bit of a paywall, and you're going to have to probably pay some money to watch Formula One races in 2026. But I think in 2026, that's where it's going to be headed. I know it's controversial to hear that news, but I think that's where it's going to be ended up going in 2026. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Fox Sports. As there was a report by Adam Stern during the Daytona duels earlier this evening that Fox Sports has officially sold out its ads for Sunday's Daytona 500, and they have sold it out quicker than they have ever before. In addition to that, Fox has told a lot of these advertisers that they are planning to do the double play screens, where they're going to be showing less full screens. They're going to do their best way they can to not have full screen ads during the Daytona 500 in 2025. This is something that NBC did at the end of last year at the 3 Super Speedway races at Daytona, Atlanta, and in Talladega Super Speedway. And we saw ratings increases for those events. Hearing this news, say what you want to say about Fox and say what you want to say about their coverage during the duels earlier this evening. I got to say this is a big win for Fox and a big win for NASCAR as a whole. One of my biggest gripes that I've had with TV coverage, especially on Fox, is the fact there's been so many full screen commercials and you're missing the action. If you don't have a full screen commercial, you're not missing as much of the action. You still get to see the action that's going on. Now, if you want to do a full screen commercial during a caution, fine, that's understandable. But I do think that there has to be a way where there isn't a full screen ad taking up your screen the whole entire event. I think that's something that really has needed to be worked on for a very, very long time. And hearing that they are, one, sold out ads as quick as they've had. They're going to have a Chili's ads, it looks like, and other big companies working with it. But the fact they have sold out their ads for the event, I think is a big, big win. And I think the fact there's not going to probably be a lot of full screen commercials, I think is a massive, massive dub for Fox and NASCAR as a whole. I think we'll see ratings increases like we did for the race to happen on USA and NBC last year. I think that there should be less full screen commercials during races. You don't see this during the NBA. You don't see it during the NFL. So find a way to make sure that people can tune in. Otherwise, people are going to click off and go watch something else because fans are finicky with all that stuff. I think, though, that they're making the right decision to not have full screen ads, in my honest opinion, for most of the events. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daytona 500 qualifying. As there was a report by Adam Stern earlier today that FS1 got 916,000 viewers for last night's Daytona 500 qualifying session. That is up 12% from 821,000. That is another increase. I think back in 2022 or 23, I think it was around 800,000. The prior year in 2022, I think it was around 750 to 800,000. So this is a major, major jump for NASCAR. Obviously, you had a lot of interesting names. Shane Gisbergen run the Daytona 500. You also, of course, have Helio Castroneves, who has a big IndyCar audience. But I think NASCAR has been growing a little bit more. And I think this is a really big step in the right direction for NASCAR. And you got to think about this too. They had to put some of the coverage on FS2 because they had a basketball game going on. So the fact that almost 1 million people tuned in to FS1, that is huge. And I think that's at least a good start considering there is going to be a lot more cable races in 2025 and less races on broadcast TV this upcoming year. So the more of increase in ratings you can have, the better it's going to be for everybody. So I'm really glad to see this news. And it's awesome to see that ratings go up in those areas. Hopefully that means the Daytona 500 with the antics and the people that are interested. Hopefully that means the Daytona 500 has been up. The Clash is up from the prior year, 2024 as well. So we're not off to a bad start so far in 2025. I think it's going to be interesting to see what the ratings are for the Daytona 500, if they can go up. Hopefully the weather can hold us so we don't have issues on that front. But I'm glad to see the ratings were up for Daytona 500 qualifying. I think that's a pretty big dub overall to see it increase a little bit, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Busch. As there was a report by Adam Stern earlier this morning, that Busch has signed an extension with NASCAR to continue as a premier partner and continue as the official beer sponsor of NASCAR going into the future. And they're also going to have a country music song concert series that they're going to be doing as well at multiple tracks like Worldwide Technology Raceway. I think I saw Dover as well, and I think maybe even for the Daytona 500 this weekend as well. This is absolutely huge. This is one of the big premier partners that is sticking around in the sport. Busch is one of the 4 or 5 big premier partners they have. Xfinity is one of the other ones that recently has also signed a multi-year extension for the premier partnership, and it's really good to see that this is going to continue on. And you also hear a lot of rumors and conversations, right, about Busch potentially becoming the entitlement sponsor for the secondary series as Xfinity, while they're going to be sticking around as a premier partner in 2026. They're not going to be a full season sponsor for the Xfinity series next year, so they got to find a new premier partner for that event and the series as a whole next year. But I think Busch sticking around, I think it's very likely that Busch is going to go ahead and be that premier partner and the premier name for the secondary series going into 2026. I think that's very likely at this point. And again, I think that Busch coming in, I think it's great to see. I think the ads that I've seen from some people who've done some of those ads and also some of the logos as well that I have seen with Busch being on there, it just makes a lot of sense for Busch to be the main sponsor they truly end up using. So overall, I think that's really, really good that Busch has signed an extra extension for the next couple years. They didn't reveal exactly how long it's going to go. My guess is probably close to the end of the decade at this point, probably like 2029 or 2030. But I think it's really good to see that Busch has signed that extension. It will be sticking around at least for the foreseeable future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the CW. As there was reported by Adam Stern yesterday morning that the CW will debut a new graphics package for its NASCAR coverage highlighted by a horizontal bumper on the bottom of the screen. In addition to that, it was reported by Adam Stern later in the day that they will also air practice and qualifying live on the app and will not be live on TV in 2025, and they will also unfortunately not be showing any of the races live on the app. I gotta say, first looking at the horizontal screen, I do like this screen. It does look really, really good. I do like it on the bottom. I'm not as big a fan of the pile-on. I think having on the bottom of the screen where you're able to actually see the names, you get about top 15 and top 20. I think also taking up less of the screen is a really, really important thing. And I do like some of the images that they showed from it as well. Showing from last year, yes, they showed some images from like 1999 and 2000 with the spotters up in the sand at Phoenix Raceway. But I think the new graphics package does look really solid for the CW. Unfortunate part I have a big problem with is the fact that practice and qualifying, especially later today, is going to be on the app. I personally think they should have found a way to squeeze it on TV. I get that practice qualifying to some people is not as important, but to me, I feel like it is very, very important to put that on TV and not put it behind a paywall. Now, granted, a big positive with the CW is it's live on the air free, and if you do have the CW on your TV provider, you will be able to watch it on the app as well. You're just going to have to sign in to make sure you have that. But I do have some issues with that, at least that area, right? Where the fact it's going to be behind a paywall or behind an app area where you have to basically get certain things done for that. And I'm not the biggest fan of that personally. But at the same token, same time, I get what they want to do. They wanted to make a little bit more money. Again, like I mentioned, yes, I completely understand that you don't have to pay any money for the CW to get on the app. But at the same token, same time, I think that's a little bit of a negative. They usually don't have things like that. This feels like what IndyCar did, where they put the practice and qualifying sessions for their networks basically behind a paywall of Peacock, which you have to pay a little bit of money to be able to watch live on sports. I think it's like $10, I'm pretty sure. I think that's the same thing for the IMSA coverage going into 2025, which we know, of course, that all the IndyCar practice qualifying sessions are going to be on TV, which that's a big step for Fox's coverage. Indy 500 coverage also will be on Fox for a majority of the qualifying session. So I think that's a big positive for that network, and it's a little bit of a disappointment, all things considered, a little bit, to see that the practice and qualifying sessions are not going to be live on TV in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kevin Harvick. As Kevin Harvick revealed earlier today that he will be on the Indianapolis 500 broadcast in 2025. On top of that as well, he did reveal that he'll be doing the Truck Series broadcast later tonight. He will also be in, I believe, the Truck Series broadcast for Homestead Miami Speedway in about a month or so from now, and I think a couple other Truck Series broadcasts in 2025, along with, of course, doing every single NASCAR Cup Series broadcast in 2025. But the big one is being on the Indy 500 broadcast. We know Fox has stated very recently they are planning to bring some of the NASCAR talent out to do the Indianapolis 500 coverage. We know that Will Buxton is going to be the play-by-play guy for IndyCar this year, and James Hinchcliffe and Townsend Bell are going to be in the booth this year. But I think Kevin Harvick, who doesn't really have a lot of experience being in IndyCar races or doesn't have as much IndyCar knowledge, being out there is certainly interesting. And I think it's cool that Kevin Harvick will get to experience his first Indy 500. That's an event that a lot of people really want to tick off on their bucket list, and they want to show up to those events as a whole. But I don't really know if he should be in the booth in some way, shape, or form. When it comes to the IndyCar stuff, I think people that have knowledge on IndyCar stuff should be more involved with making decisions. I think Fox will have some decision on that point. I think it's going to be cool to see Kevin Harvick out there. Don't get me wrong. I understand why they're bringing him out there. But at the same token, same time, I do think, like I mentioned, already said at this point, I think Kevin Harvick doing the Indy 500 broadcast, maybe doing some of the stuff in the studio side of things, I think that's a cool thing they're going to let him do. But I don't want him basically doing and being in the booth because he doesn't know as much about IndyCar as he does with NASCAR. Whereas with NASCAR, he has so much knowledge on that. He doesn't have as much knowledge on the Indy 500 as much as he does on NASCAR, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. Now, Junior Motorsports competed in the duels earlier this evening after fortunately not having the pace and speed to be one of the two fastest open cars. And because Justin Allgaier was the highest finishing car that had not qualified their way in to the Daytona 500, he is officially locked into the 2025 Daytona 500, and Junior Motorsports officially will make their NASCAR Cup Series debut on Sunday. Everyone from Junior Motorsports was really emotional and really happy. You could see it on Kelly Earnhardt's face. She was super happy about it. You could see it on Dale Jr.'s face. You could see it in the media center earlier tonight. You could see it during the Fox broadcast. You could see that Dale Jr. was extremely happy about getting this team in the Daytona 500. Dale Jr. has been involved so much on getting this car out there and making their way in the Daytona 500. And to see that this car will actually get the race in the 2025 Daytona 500 is amazing to see. I've been waiting for this day for a very, very long time to see Dale Jr. in a junior motorsports car make a NASCAR Cup Series field. And I know it was a little more difficult for them to make it this year, considering the fact that the field was really, really strong, and it didn't seem like the Hendrick engine cars and Hendrick cars were as quick this year. Kyle Larson was the only car that made the final round of Daytona 500 qualifying last night. But to just see the fact that they made the Daytona 500 is absolutely a massive and really great accomplishment. Congratulations to them on making the Daytona 500 in 2025. It's a massive deal for that team and organization, and it's well deserved for the team as well. They put the effort into it. I know Dale Jr. has been interested in running a full-time Cup program down the road if things go the right way and the right direction. To me, it's a massive and great deal to see that Junior Motorsports will officially race in the Daytona 500 in 2025. It's really amazing for that organization. They put a lot of effort into it and time into it, and it's a massive deal for them to officially race in the Daytona 500 in 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, Speed Cafe, which does a lot of not IndyCar, but a lot of stuff in regards to Australian racing, it does some NASCAR coverage as well because of Shane Van Gisbergen. They put out an article recently that Shane Van Gisbergen revealed that he is trying to put a deal together to bring a supercar driver to the Xfinity Series at some point in 2025. Now, we know that Shane Van Gisbergen is going to make select starts with Junior Motorsports in 2025, running 4 races this year. He's going to run the Chicago Street Course. He's going to run Mexico City. I don't think he's running COTA. I think he's going to be running 2 other races like Watkins Glen. I think I saw Sonoma as the last race that he will run in 2025. So we know that he is going to run with Junior Motorsports. My big question is, what driver could it be for this year? My best guess is it's probably not going to be Cam Waters, right? Cam Waters obviously has a 4 contract right now. We are hearing there's a good chance and possibility that Cam Waters might make some select starts in the NASCAR Cup Series with RFK Racing in 2025. So I think that's very likely at this point a really good option for this year. But I don't think he'll be the guy that Shane's talking to. My best guess is Will Brown. Will Brown is associated with Red Bull in some sort of way. He's got the stuff with Erebus and also stuff with Triple 100 and the triple group that Shane drove for, the 88 car that SVG drove for. And Will Brown has been heavily rumored to be making some starts in the NASCAR Cup Series this year with Rich Schultz Racing in the 3rd car that RCR is going to run in 2025, and I do expect that is who I think he's probably talking to about making that start. I could see Chaz Mostert be the other guy that he's talking to. Brock Feeney is another name that I bring up because those guys are really, really good in the supercars lane. They've won a lot of races as well. But I think I'm leaning toward Will Brown at this point. It would be the driver that make the most sense to me, and I think it'd be really cool to see a guy like Chaz Mostert or Will Brown or Brock Feeney get the chance and opportunity to come over and race in NASCAR and make more starts. Again, Will Brown, because of his NASCAR background, he's going to run a few races with RCR. We're seeing more supercar drivers come in. Maybe Marcus Ambrose is the guy they go after again. That'd be really, really cool. But I am very excited to see that we're probably going to see someone come down and race in the Xfinity Series if they can find a sponsorship and funding to get it done. We'll see what happens, and I hope that we do get to see someone from the supercars lane get the chance and opportunity to race in the Xfinity Series at some point in 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Toni Breidinger. Now, earlier this week, Toni Breidinger during production day spoke to Bob Pockers, and Bob released the article in the video from earlier today. And she spoke on the fact that she will be racing full-time in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2025, and she has a lot of learning to go through this year in regards to restarts, and she fully understands that it is going to be a big learning year for her in 2025. She, of course, will drive the number 5 truck for Tricon Garage this year, with Raising Cane's as a majority sponsor throughout the 2025 season. Now, Toni Breidinger, obviously, there's a lot of controversy around her getting behind the wheel, right? Toni Breidinger is someone that, while I do respect her as an individual, what she does and what she's been able to do in regards to social media, as she does have a pretty massive and huge social media presence, she's not someone that has been able to bring in as much behind the wheel if we're going to be real. Look, Toni Breidinger, do I think she has some talent? Sure, she's the winningest USAC female driver, I'm pretty sure, the most wins for a female driver in the USAC ranks, and she's also won some races in other classes of racing as well. And to be fair, in the select starts that she had in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2023, she actually ran quite well and got some top 20 finishes, including, I believe, a top 20 at Kansas and a top 20 in her debut at Gateway as well. But the thing with Toni Breidinger, and this is how I feel about her, is that I think she's going to really struggle this year. Last year in ARCA, she didn't even score a single top 5 finish. And the competition was weaker in 2025 than in ARCA last year than some of the drivers that were in ARCA a few years ago. Her biggest competition were guys like Christian Rose, who isn't full-time this year, or other guys in this series. Realistically, for Toni, I don't expect her to be a major factor in series contender in 2025. Maybe she could prove me wrong and does have a really, really good season. But again, I just don't expect much from her. I think she's going to struggle quite a bit, and she isn't going to have the pace and speed to be a major factor in series contender this season. I think she finishes most likely around that 15th to 20th range. That's about where Dean Thompson ran this past year. She's not as good of a driver as Hailie Deegan, in my opinion. Hailie Deegan is a better driver, but that's just my opinion on that. So we'll see what ends up happening for performance this year. I'd like to see her do really, really good, but again, I'm not expecting much from her, and I think it'll be a little bit of struggle for her being with the team in 2025. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona 500 practice. Now, NASCAR, before the season began, they added an extra Daytona 500 practice. And some drivers had interesting comments in regards to that extra Daytona 500 practice being added. Christopher Bell was one of the most outspoken in regards to this, and Christopher Bell says there should not have been a practice, and he felt like the extra practice session for his team, he felt like it was completely unnecessary, and he feels that NASCAR did not need to have that extra Daytona 500 practice. However, there are multiple drivers that disagree with Christopher Bell's comments. One of those is Brad Keselowski. Brad Keselowski, who is a team owner in the NASCAR Cup Series and a driver, of course, he feels that that extra practice that we have for the Daytona 500 was absolutely, completely necessary. And Dale Jr. also agreed as well by saying, here's the thing, if you don't want to run the extra practice session, you don't have to. But there's a lot of teams that really would like to have that extra practice session so they can get the cars tuned down for the year. As much as I agree with a lot of things that Christopher Bell has said in recent years, I have to completely disagree with Christopher Bell on this one. Here's why I completely disagree. Look what happened during Daytona 500 practice. Multiple drivers have power steering issues. Brad Keselowski, Ryan Preece, AJ Allmendinger, Eric Jones had a clutch issue. And other drivers, I believe the Junior Motorsports car that Justin Allgaier drove, it also had fundamental issues and flaws as well that needed to be fixed. I think that extra Daytona 500 practice session was absolutely necessary. And I get from Christopher Bell's end that he probably feels like it doesn't need to be necessary for his team and organization, but to me, I think it was necessary. I think he needed that extra practice session so they could get the cars tied down, so they could have the cars ready to be good to go. I think they needed that extra session to be set up for the season, and I think it was a little bit disappointing to see Bell say these comments. Again, Joe Gibbs Racing has the most resources, right? So they're going to be in the best position, and they're not going to have to worry about a lot of this kind of stuff. But I think for a lot of the other teams that had issues, I think that extra practice session was necessary, and I think it was a good decision to go ahead and have that extra practice session. To get from Bell's end, probably why they didn't need the extra practice session, but a lot of the other teams really needed that extra practice session, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ty Dillon. Now, earlier this week during Daytona Media Day, Steven Tarana from CBS Sports spoke to Ty Dillon about going back to stuff owned by Richard Childress Racing. And Rich Childress, of course, was on a Dale Jr. Dallin not too long ago. And Ty Dillon basically commented on some of the comments that Richard Childress said. He said he was a little bit perplexed by Richard Childress' comments. He felt like that he didn't leave the team to just go find his own thing and go do other stuff. He said he had to go do some other stuff to basically continue racing in the sport. Now, Ty Dillon was part of the RCR camp and part of that family group over there for the last few years, back in like 2017 all the way to 2020, of course, when he drove for RCR in the Truck Series, and also, of course, when he did drive for them in the Xfinity Series from 2014 up to around 2017. And then he went to Germain and was with them through 2020, and then Germain shut down, and he started going part-time with teams like 23XI a little bit, and then, of course, he drove for Joe Gibbs Racing. I think that Richard Childress, I guess some of the comments that he was trying to make about Ty coming in, and at least for Ty Dillon so far, he's starting to get off on a decent note. had a really strong duel very recently. And of course, he did qualify very well for the Daytona 500. So maybe Kaulig is looking a little better than I think we all really realize. But sometimes Richard Childs, I feel like he needs to keep his mouth shut. He sometimes opens his mouth, and he doesn't need to open his mouth in some of these situations. And I think he will jump the gun on certain situations as well. So while I do understand from his perspective why he probably is happy to see Ty back into the team, I do think that Richard sometimes needs to keep his mouth shut and not say what and feel how his kids feel. I think or grandkids, I should say. I personally think that Ty Dillon had interesting comments there, and I think that Ty Dillon was not completely wrong about what Richard said. I think he jumped a little gun from the comments that Richard said, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jimmie Johnson. Now, if you're paying attention during Media Day, you probably saw something that came out from Bob Pockers. Over the offseason, there were some ownership changes that happened in regards to Legacy Motor Club. Nighthead Capital, which is a company firm and have bought an equity stake into Legacy Motor Club. And Jimmie Johnson now is pretty much the full-on owner of Legacy Motor Club going forward, while Maury Gallagher has taken a pretty big step backwards and is no longer the majority owner of the team going into 2025. Some people had felt like the Jimmie Johnson had kind of kicked Maury Gallagher out, but Maury Gallagher is still at the team. He's just got less of an open stake in the team. Another big thing to note is that Jimmie Johnson has moved back to North Carolina in the last couple months to be more hands-on with Legacy Motor Club going forward. And he explained the decision in a really big way by saying, look, I didn't kick Maury Gallagher out. I basically wanted to come in and started running the team a lot more. And Maury Gallagher, to be fair, is getting a lot older and he's not getting any younger. And Jimmie Johnson has long-term, the plan has been for Jimmie Johnson to become the full owner of this program going forward. And I think that Jimmie Johnson being the full-scale owner, I think is going to make the team much better. And they showed really good speed during the Daytona duels. I know it's so early in the season, but Legacy really needs to turn the corner. 2024 was a complete disaster for Legacy. So if Jimmie Johnson being there can help that program get a lot better, I think that's a good step in the right direction for that team. So I really hope this team can show a lot of improvement in 2025, and I do think that Jimmie Johnson being a lot more hands-on with the program going into this year, I think there's a better chance and opportunity for that happening in 2025. So we'll see how this team ends up doing throughout the year, but they had some good speed from the duels. We'll talk about that controversy in just a short little bit, but I think there's a lot of positivity in regards to Legacy Motor Club currently at this particular moment. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Open Exemption Provisional. Now, this has been a big controversy that's been going on in the last couple of weeks. NASCAR announced around my birthday on January 10th that they're going to have a new OEP, which will be used for this year's Daytona 500, as Elio Castroneves will need to use that as he crashed out during the duels earlier this evening. And Elio Castroneves during Media Day completely understood why this is a controversial thing. However, he is not the one that makes the rules. Meanwhile, Mark Truex Jr. and Jimmie Johnson had a very negative opinions on the OEP. Mark Truex Jr. basically isn't the biggest fan of the rule, and Jimmie Johnson also isn't the biggest fan, as Mark Truex Jr. feels like it's a slap on the wrist and slap to the face of drivers in NASCAR who have done a lot of good work in the sport. Now, there is something that needs to be cleared up and a couple things that need brought up in regards to the Open Exemption Provisional. Number one, it's basically like a promoter's provisional. It's not an OEP, it's a promoter's provisional. And when you look at the statements of guys like Elio Castroneves, Mark Truex Jr., and Jimmie Johnson, Elio Castroneves has probably the better resume than the other two. Even though Mark Truex Jr. and Jimmie Johnson are Cup champions, Elio Castroneves has a little bit of a better resume. That's just my personal opinion. But the other thing that needs to be brought up is that Mark Truex Jr. and Jimmie Johnson, they're eligible for the OEP. Even drivers that have eliteness in NASCAR, like Jimmie Johnson, who is a NASCAR Hall of Famer, arguably the best driver in NASCAR Cup history, and Mark Truex Jr., who will be a future NASCAR Hall of Famer, they're eligible for the OEP. Obviously, Tricon Garage, we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. They just came around recently, so they are not part of the charter agreement, so they're probably not eligible to use this OEP, but Legacy did sign their charter agreement. Trackhouse knew about this. They looked at the charter agreement. They looked at it and said, oh, we can get Elio Castroneves an opportunity to run the Daytona 500. it's basically a promoter's provisional. So I understand why some are not a big fan of this rule. Just at this point, call it promoter's provisional and clear up a lot of the stuff with the teams on this front, because I think there's a lot of confusion around it. I don't feel like there should be controversy around it, but I understand why some people aren't the biggest fan of this rule. But at the same time, it's not as bad of a rule as some people are making out to be, and it's not the worst change, because it's basically like the past champions divisional. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. It's not something I'm the biggest fan of, and I understand why there's controversy around it, but I don't think it should be as controversial as it has been, and I think it's been a little bit over controversial in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the caution during the Daytona duels on the white flag of the race. Now, many of you have probably watched the Daytona duel number 2, and there was a very controversial call that took place on the white flag of the race. So coming to the checker flag of the race, Erik Jones and Austin were coming down the front straightaway side by side. There was a crash that happened coming to the start-finish line when Shane Van Gisbergen and Christopher Bell had contact coming down the front straightaway. And there was a big wreck that started. Now, sometimes NASCAR has had the tendency to wait till they come across the line to maybe throw the caution. However, like they've done also many times before, they decided to throw the caution 25 to 30 feet before the line. It looked like Erik Jones had won the race. He was on the start-finish line and basically was excited to get the win. And then 5 minutes later, after reviewing it, it actually looked like Austin had won the race, and Austin was the winner of the event. Austin looked really awkward about it. He's just a little bit confused and didn't really understand what was going on a little bit. And then Erik Jones was definitely a little bit disappointed. I explained this in my video, and I'm going to say it here again. NASCAR needs to, for the love of God, stop being so trigger happy with the cautions. This controversy was not necessary. Let the finish play out naturally. Look back 2007. The 2007 Daytona 500 is one of the greatest races of all time. Had one of the best finishes of all time. There was also a multi-car wreck on the white flag of the race, and Clint Bowyer went upside down in that event. NASCAR didn't throw the caution then. They let it play out. They've done it many times where they've let the finishes play out. I don't understand why NASCAR jumps the gun sometimes on this. They're going to come back. They're going to slow down. And NASCAR's explanation I thought was completely ridiculous too, saying, oh, they were going to slow down and we were worried they were going to run into each other. What? They all can slow down. These are drivers that are world-class drivers and know how to use a freaking brake pedal, NASCAR. So to say that they're going to basically fix this and calm down in 50 feet is bonkers to me. It's another dumb and stupid decision by NASCAR that really needs to get straightened out in the sport going forward, because otherwise people are going to quit watching your sport. So stop making dumb decisions. It didn't even take 3 races to have a controversy. It took 3 races, and not even a points-paying race. It took 3 races to have a controversy, NASCAR. I don't want to go down this path. We had the issues with the Roval last year. Stop putting yourself in controversies. You'll be in a better position as a sport, and fans won't be as pissed off. Stop getting in your own way, because you ruined what was a good first duel. Bubba Wallace and Junior Motorsports getting the wins they got were incredible, but stop, for the love of God, putting yourself in this position. You're getting in your own way, and you're putting yourselves in bad positions that are not needed. It was an unnecessary caution. Stop throwing stupid cautions, NASCAR. Otherwise, fans are going to get tired of this BS very soon. So let's clean it up, please, because I think a lot of fans will be happy if you stop making stupid and dumb mistakes. Please clean it up. Please. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Donald Trump. Now, earlier this afternoon before the Daytona duels, Jerry Jordan from KickingTheTires.net put out a tweet showing that Trump's helicopter, Marine One, is being offloaded ahead of his visit. Now, what is this visit, you may say? Well, Donald Trump is expected to attend the 2025 Daytona 500. This has been very, very controversial. On one hand, you have people that are not happy to see Donald Trump at the Daytona 500. One, because Donald Trump has been at the Daytona 500 the last couple times, or the last couple races he's attended. There's been rainouts. There's been other things as well we're not going to get into here. But Donald Trump also has a lot of people that are very, very excited to see him at the event, including many drivers in the industry. For me, I kind of lean more toward the side. I think it's really cool that the President of the United States, regardless of what political party you stand on, I think it's really cool that the President of the United States wants to come out and show up at an event. And I do think there's a chance that Donald Trump may end up sticking around, and maybe he doesn't end up sticking around and stay for the event. But I think it is absolutely huge that Donald Trump, who is the president of the United States, who is one of the biggest big figures in the United States, will stick around out. He's expected, for what people are saying, to do some laps around the Daytona International Speedway like he did in 2020, which I thought that was really cool back in 2020, by the way. And I certainly do think it'd be pretty awesome to see Trump should be at the track for a little bit, and being there it's just cool. I think it's so exciting in a way that Donald Trump wants to be there and wants to be at the Daytona 500. I get why some people aren't fans of Donald Trump. He's had a lot of controversies. We've seen Bubba Wallace's comments about him, which Bubba Wallace had every right to say what he wants. And, people are getting mad at Bubba for saying he doesn't really care. I don't know why people are mad at Bubba for that, to be honest. Bubba literally doesn't care anymore. It's been 5 years he's moved on. He's got a good mental game at this point. He's starting the year off on a strong note by winning the Daytona duels. So I think Bubba really doesn't care what Donald Trump thinks at this point about him. And I don't think Trump cares what Bubba Wallace thinks about him either. I don't think they really care at this point. So overall, I think it's good that Donald Trump is going to be at this year's Daytona 500. It's going to be a big deal. Security is going to be a big thing to watch out for, as well as from what people said, there was a lot of security in 2020, though it won't be campaigning like he did in 2020 for the 2020 election. So we'll keep an eye on that, but he will be at the Daytona 500 in 2025, as expected to be. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Tricon Garage. Now, Mark Truex Jr. was speaking to Sirius XM NASCAR Radio earlier this week during the media days, and he might have let the cat slip out of the back that it sounds like, according to him, that Tricon Garage could be running some more NASCAR Cup Series races in 2025. Now, he did not reveal if he plans any more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series this year, but Mike Joy basically did say that he has heard that Martin Truex Jr. on the broadcast, it sounds like that Martin Truex Jr. may make some more NASCAR Cup Series starts at some point in 2025. This does not shock me or surprise me. Tricon Garage, they have a lot of ambitions. The team is growing their Truck Series program. They've got Corey Heim, who's been a championship threat over there, but they've also got more money coming over there with Toni Breidinger being full-time this year, and Gio Ruggiero also being a full-time driver as a rookie this season, along with other drivers who will be part-time with that program, like Brent Cruz, Lois Allen, and Brandon Jones as well in that part-time number 1 truck, along with William Sawalage. I think Tricon Garage running more Cup Series races would be really, really cool. And I hope they do end up doing that. Now, I don't think that Tricon Garage is going to run, like, let's say 10 or 12 races this year. I don't think that's realistic at this point. But I think it's very realistic they're going to try to run all the crown jewels. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of, like, a Corey Heim getting behind the wheel of their car this year. Corey is expected to make select starts in the 2311 car in 2025, but if they want to dip their toes in the sand and maybe down the road try to get a charter so that Corey Heim could be a full-time driver, I think that'd be good. But I think this also is huge in a sense as well, because you think about Toyota. Toyota has a massive backlog of young talent that don't have rides currently at the moment. I think that's one of the reasons why we had issues with Chandler Smith finding a ride, and why people like Eric Almirola haven't found rides for this year at this point, though Eric may make some starts at some point this year. But I think when you think about Tricon, you think about a team that wants to grow their program. David Gillen is interested. Joe Gibbs wants to bring more people in. And this could lead to more opportunities for if they ever want to go for a charter, like I mentioned. They'll have that opportunity to use the money that they get, and they'll have the opportunity to bring someone in they really, really want to bring in, which I think in a sense is really, really huge for them as well. So again, this is going to be a big story to follow. Again, I do think they're going to run around 5 to 10 races this year. That's my best guess at this point. And once more information does come out about Tricon's future, we'll discuss here live on the channel, which I think will be huge that they do run more races, along with Junior Motorsports as well, which I think they're going to run more races in the Cup Series this year. So I think it's huge nonetheless for sure. I think it's great to see that Tricon Garage is expected to run more races. My prediction is Corey Heim gets behind the wheel. If Carl Edwards wants to drive as well, maybe we see him get behind the wheel, because Carl's expressed some interest in maybe doing that practice session for Hendrick. Maybe we see him do a start for Tricon. That'd be really, really cool. But I think it's also exciting to see that Tricon may be doing some more NASCAR Cup Series races in 2025. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Daniel Suarez. Now, Daniel Suarez very recently during Media Day spoke a little bit on the contract with Trackhouse Racing and was asked about, is there a lot of pressure going into 2026 being with Trackhouse Racing and being in a contract year? Now, Daniel Suarez at the middle of last year, around early August, basically announced a one-year extension with Trackhouse Racing, despite the fact that we had heard he had signed a multi-year extension with Trackhouse and ended up being only a one-year deal with the Trackhouse Racing organization going into 2025. That means that Daniel Suarez is in a contract year going into 2026. And while he may say it may not weigh on him going into the year, I do think that Daniel Suarez is probably thinking about his future currently at the moment right now. And here is why. There is a young driver at the Trackhouse family named Connor Zilisch. Connor Zilisch is going to be full-time with the Junior Motorsports team in the 88 car. And a lot of the Trackhouse people are going to be working with that car this year. And also Connor is making his NASCAR Cup Series debut in the number 87 car with Red Bull sponsorship. I think that if Connor Zilisch absolutely outperforms Suarez, which I think is very realistic when we do get the Circuit of the Americas, I do think that Chastain and SVJ are also likely going to outperform Daniel Suarez. I think that will really put a lot of eyes on the radar of Suarez. I think of all the drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series going into this year, and they're on the hot seat, I think Suarez is the number one driver on the hot seat currently at the moment. Kyle Busch is obviously the biggest free agent going into the year, but I think that Daniel Suarez right now is the biggest driver on the hot seat currently at the moment. Because if he struggles this year with Trackhouse Racing and Connor sets the world on fire with Junior Motorsports, which I think is very realistic at this point, there is a very good chance and possibly Daniel Suarez could end up being a free agent at the end of this year. And he really, really, really needs to run good this year because otherwise he will not have a right going to 26 at least with Trackhouse Racing. I don't want to see that for Suarez. I think Daniel Suarez is good for the sport, and I know he wants help to grow the sport in a pretty big way. But I think that Suarez really needs to run good, and I'm just not sure if that is going to happen this year. So we'll see what Daniel Suarez can do in 2025, because I think it's a big year for Suarez to really run really, really good, because otherwise, if he can't run good going into this year, there's a very realistic chance and possibility that he will not have a ride going into 2026, which would be really, really unfortunate with the Trackhouse family. But I think that he needs to run a lot better. Otherwise, there's a really good chance that he'll be looking for a new ride going into the 2026 season. And I think it likely ends up being Kaulig or another team in the NASCAR Cup Series, because I think he will still be a Cup driver next year. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the NASCAR playoffs. Now, NASCAR has released a new podcast with multiple people in the industry to do things in regards to officiating, which is called Hauler Talk. And recently they had Steve O'Donnell, who is, of course, one of the higher-ups in NASCAR, on their podcast. And there was a lot of very interesting details that came out of this podcast very, very recently. So according to what was said by Steve O'Donnell in the second half of the show, when he joined the show, basically NASCAR is planning to have a committee in regards to the playoffs. Obviously, NASCAR has talked about making some major playoff changes going into 2026, and NASCAR is planning to have a committee around that, from drivers, to former drivers, to people who work in the industry, media members, and even fans as well, and people who do executives in TV as well. This feels very similar to something that Jarrett brought up on his channel back in 2009 when there was a town hall after the racing wasn't good in 2009. There was a lot of complaining about that, and then double file restarts came into effect. Now, if NASCAR is to implement a new playoff system, it will very likely come in 2026. If it does come next year, it probably will come in the early portion of 2026. It is certainly interesting if they are going to have a committee for the playoffs. If they do decide to make any playoff changes, it does sound like they're going to make some pretty big changes for the playoffs going into the future, which it desperately is needed. They need to make some playoff changes. The fact that they didn't make any playoff changes at all this year was a little bit disappointing. I do think there's a very likely chance it needs to change, and I think there's a good chance it will change in some sort of capacity going into 2026. Continuing on, this is a big one. NASCAR is talking about rotating the championship race and moving it to different venues every single year. Now, one type of track you will not see races as a championship event is going to be super speedways. He didn't rule out the possibility of road course or even a street course being the season finale, but it doesn't sound very likely that it's going to be a road course or a street course being the finale anytime down the road, unless the venue can be really, really good. He does also emphasize that the event has to be a championship level town where they're going to promote the championship in a really big way, which I strongly agree with. I think when it comes to the track that hosts a season finale, it needs to be able to promote down. Say what you want to say about Phoenix. Yes, the racing in Phoenix has not been very good, but when you go to Phoenix, what people say, people can see a lot of promotion around the track, which I think that's one thing that's made Phoenix at least a good championship town, even if the racing has not been very, very good. Now, getting to the rotation and stuff, and he also said that the weather doesn't have to be super sunny and 80 degrees. And I think he's referencing 2 tracks there, Darlington, even Charlotte, and Kansas Speedway. A lot of people talk about Darlington being the season finale, but also people say Kansas Speedway should be the season finale, which I absolutely agree. But I think when it comes to rotating the season finale, this has needed to happen for a very, very long time. When you have the same thing going on every single year, it can end up being stagnated. They had Homestead as a championship finale from like 2001 up until, 2002, I should say, up until the end of 2019. And people kind of got tired of it in 2019 where they rotated it to Phoenix in 2020. But people have already gotten tired of Phoenix. I think rotating it to different tracks, that is something that needs to be done. Or just make Homestead the season finale. That's the easy thing you can do, but NASCAR doesn't want to really make that easy. So I think Homestead being the season finale, if they can get the track renovated, that'd be a good track to go to. Kansas, I think, would absolutely be one of my personal favorite choices. One, it's one of my hometown tracks. Live not that far from Kansas Speedway, so I'd definitely be out there for the season finale if it did become the season finale. And I live close to Kansas, so while the weather isn't amazing in November times, I've been to areas like that where it's been in the 70s and 80s, because sometimes in the Midwest it can be very, very warm. So I think Kansas being the season finale, that'd be good. They've talked about maybe some short tracks down the road and maybe even tracks on the East Coast hosting it. National Super Speedway would be an interesting one, as someone brought up. But if I'm thinking about tracks that could host the season finale, if you can't get Homestead for 2026, make Kansas season finale. That would work wonders for me. The racing would be really good because the Next Gen car puts on a good product. You would have a good variety of drivers being up front, and you wouldn't have the same driver winning every single week. So I think that they should rotate it, and I really hope they do go rotate it. And for me, my season finale choice is going to be Kansas Speedway, because Kansas would be the best track personally for racing at the moment. To be honest with you, I hope they do it. We'll see if they do end up doing it in 2026. And now we're going to jump on to the first of 2 major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about 2311 Racing. Now, during media days earlier this week, Denny Hamlin revealed some very interesting information in regards to 2311 Racing. He first spoke positively on Riley Herbst going into 2025 by saying that people are not really crediting Riley Herbst as much as many people think. And I'll say this about Riley Herbst real quick. As much as I think Riley Herbst did show a lot of improvement in Xfinity Series the last couple of years, let's be real and honest, he won 3 races in a 5-year span. Granted, all 3 came in the last 2 years, so that is definitely a lot better. But Riley Herbst isn't the best driver. However, one thing that got brought up in regards to 2311 Racing is the fact that it does sound like that 2311 Racing is going to expand a little bit throughout the year and run a fourth car in 2025. We've been hearing some rumors they were going to run a 4th car at some point this year. They're not the only team that's likely going to have a 4th car this year. Spire Motorsports has pretty much confirmed they're going to have a 4th part-time entry in the NASCAR Cup Series this year, with Hendrick support in a pretty big way. So wouldn't be surprised if Raj Groove and Corey Day somehow make their NASCAR Cup debut at some point this year with their affiliation. Maybe even Connor Zilisch makes a few starts in that car. We also do know, of course, that RFK may end up running a 4th part-time entry this year. That will likely go to Cam Waters. Colleague could run a 3rd part-time car at some point this year, but I'm not entirely sure if they're going to do that. And Christian Eckes, from what I understand, is not planning to make any NASCAR Cup Series starts at this time. But I think 2311 going back to them. They're going to run a 4th part-time car. They're not going to run 4 full-time cars. This is despite the fact they are in a lawsuit currently at the moment right now, and they probably are going to be a lot more focused on that. Now, if they do end up running this car, who will be the driver to get behind the wheel? Well, most likely, it's going to be Corey Heim. Corey Heim has a contract with 2311 Racing. He is the reserve driver for the team and does a simulator work for 2311 Racing and Legacy Motor Club, and I believe that contract was a multi-year deal that started at the beginning of the year. So I think he'll be the most likely driver to get behind the wheel. Now, I could also see a Kamui Kobayashi getting behind the wheel. Kamui Kobayashi does have a deal with Toyota. If they do end up running some road course races with that 3rd car, I would have to think he would be a front runner to get behind the wheel of that seat. And I also think about the fact maybe if, let's say, Kurt Busch wants to come back. Kurt Busch has been medically cleared to return to NASCAR. And he could come back if he wants to. He's going to run the Race of Champions next month. So I definitely think that Kurt Busch would be a decent candidate to put behind the wheel. And I think it'd be cool for him to come back and maybe make a one-off or a couple starts this year. And I also think if Carl Edwards won't do it, he could do it too, even though he's probably not going to do it. I think other drivers in the Toyota camp could also be potential candidates, like an Eric Almirola, right? Eric Almirola, we know he's interested in maybe doing some select starts this year, so that would be another driver I'd be looking at. But outside of that, I'm not entirely sure. 2311 Racing, of course, will never end up being a four full-time cars unless they want to run the fourth car that's full-time, part-time, the fourth part-time car, full-time, I should say. I think it would be very difficult for them to do that. But going back to 2311, I really am glad to see that they're going to likely run a fourth part-time car. And again, I think it's going to be Corey Heim's ride for the most part. Corey Heim is never going to be a Joe Gibbs Racing driver unless things end up getting cleared up over there. And it is certainly going to be a lot more difficult for them to have four full-time cars or even a fourth charter, because they can't run a four full-time charters with the charter agreement that came out very, very recently, even though 2311 Racing is technically suing NASCAR at this point, currently at the moment. But again, going back to 2311, having a fourth part-time entry is really, really huge. I think they're going to be successful this year. And I think that having, like I said, an extra car that could be on the racetrack, more sim work, more information that they can have, especially with the drivers they choose, that will be huge for the team, showing a lot of success. So we'll see what drivers they end up choosing to get behind the wheel of this fourth part-time entry. But like I said, it sounds like there will be a fourth part-time car for 2311 Racing. I think it will be a road courses and maybe even run some super speedways and intermediates like it did in 2024. Pretty cool that we will see that car show up at some point in 2025. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about the 2311 Informer Motorsports lawsuit once again. Now, I did a video covering this on the channel earlier today, but NASCAR, as expected, has officially filed this appeal against 2311 Informer Motorsports. They filed the appeal brief in regards to the ruling of the preliminary injunction. NASCAR is accusing the judge, that being Judge Kenneth Bell, of having a lot of errors in regards to his decision, jumping the gun really quickly, and he feels like the teams do not deserve the charters that they have received. But there's one very interesting thing that Jenna Fryer from the Associated Press brought up that has gotten a lot of attention on social media. According to what she had reported, NASCAR says that just because you do not agree with the terms we set up, does that mean that you can go ahead and sue us? And she reports that if the 2311 Informer Motorsports end up winning the lawsuit against NASCAR in the antitrust claims and that kind of stuff, there is a very good chance and possibility that NASCAR could go ahead and remove the charter system as a whole. Now, many fans are going to see their report, and they're absolutely going to be rejoiced. And if it was about 10 years ago, I'd probably be doing the same thing. However, I think we need to really look at the facts here. This is the nuclear option. These teams that agreed to the preliminary, not the preliminary injunction, but the new charter rules, the 13 of the 15 teams that actually agreed to it, they would be royally screwed. And they would be in a lot of trouble financially. And it would not be a good thing for the sport as a whole. Look, I think the charter system, there's a lot of fundamental issues with it. There's no question on that. I wasn't the biggest fan of charters, and I've been not the biggest fan of the charter system as a whole. And if it wasn't so much a financial issue, I don't think most people would have issues. And I think when people see charters, they think, oh, we get to basically go ahead and not lock anybody in to events as a whole. But here's the issue. A lot of these teams are going to sue NASCAR. If this ends up happening where NASCAR does go ahead and remove the charter system completely, you're going to have a lot of lawsuits that are going to end up taking place, and a lot of lawsuits that are going to happen, especially from a lot of teams. And I think that we could see a lot of teams end up going on strike, and we may even see a split series come into play. This would be the final straw for a lot of teams. And they would feel like that NASCAR, which NASCAR thinks they can live on, which, yes, they've been around for 77 years. There's no question on that at this point. And they would be able to survive, but not for long if it gets to this point. And you wouldn't have any teams, especially new teams coming in, they would look at this and basically say, yeah, we don't want to join up at this point if we're just going to feel like we're not going to be in the best position financially. There wouldn't have been so many teams like Spire showing up or Trackhouse showing up, or 2311 showing up, or even Front Row getting better, or a lot of these other teams getting better if it wasn't for the charters and the benefits of those charter agreements. I think that NASCAR doesn't want to go down that road. I think NASCAR would like to reach a settlement long term, and I think that's what they want. But I don't know if that is going to happen. And I think this kind of corresponds to something that Adam Stern had reported earlier this week that we talked about on the channel. NASCAR is already beginning to be interested in selling off an equity stake of the sport. And you think about a lot of money coming into play that could be given to the teams. Saudi Arabia, as much as I hate to say Saudi Arabia, being involved and getting involved in a sport in some way, shape, or form, that's the only thing that I can kind of come up to at this point in regards to who would be the one that would invest. Because Saudi Arabia has got billions upon billions upon billions of dollars of blood money and oil money as well that they would give to NASCAR, and probably Saudi Arabia would get involved in some way, shape, or form. But in regards to the charter system being abolished, again, I understand why some fans don't like the charter system. It's fine and understandable. And I think that that would be the nuclear option. And that would basically be the thing that Eric Cartman brought up by saying, screw you guys, I'm going home. That would not be the best thing for the sport as a whole. So I really hope NASCAR doesn't go down that nuclear path and doesn't go down that nuclear option where they decide to go ahead and not grant them other teams' charters. Because again, you're going to have a lot of teams suing. Hendrick will sue. RCR will sue. Trackhouse will sue. RFK will sue. Colleague will sue. Everybody in the sport, whether it's big or small, is going to be suing on antitrust claims. Because then you're going to have a lot more antitrust claims. And some of the things they claim in the lawsuit and basically the appeal, I don't agree with a lot of things that NASCAR stands for. Yes, maybe the judge could have waited a little bit to not jump the gun and had the appeal hearing, but he didn't want to hear it, and they had all this stuff happen. So at this point, if the charter system goes away, it won't be good for the sport, and it will not be the best thing for the sport as a whole. So the charter system might be gone, and a lot of charters might end up being on the market, which some would probably like. But at the same time, when I look at this situation, it won't be the best thing as a whole if NASCAR just completely gets rid of the charter agreement as a whole. I really hope there's a resolution, maybe a settlement down the road, but I'm looking at the lawsuit right, and I think there's going to be a massive, massive culture shift in the sport. Because if they get rid of the charter system, stock car racing, as we know, will change forever. Probably not in the best way either. And I don't think NASCAR wants to go that nuclear path, but NASCAR doesn't seem to realize that going to nuclear path is probably not the best option. So we'll see how the rest of the lawsuit plays out. We've got Discovery coming up in May. We got stuff due in September, and then we got the court case on the 1st, and we'll see who ends up winning. If 2011 Front Row lose the lawsuit, then at that particular point, NASCAR would win and things would probably go back to normal, but 2011 Front Row would probably be gone, and the drivers of the team and those organizations like Bubba Wallace, Tyler Reddick, and those guys would all be in trouble looking for rides going into 2026. So this is going to be a big story to follow and continue watching as time goes on, but I think it'll be something to keep your eyes out on definitely for sure. So, that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so that if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go over that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. You think NASCAR will abolish the charter system in the future or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and what drivers you want to see in the 2011 fourth car. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later tonight on the channel, reactions to NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race from later tonight. If the race ends up happening, if the weather can hold off. Tomorrow on the channel, we're going to have the Xfinity review. We're also going to have reactions, probably some other videos as well, and other news that will break. Then on Sunday, we'll have Daytona reactions to Daytona 500, probably a Chevy and Gisbergen video. And, of course, we will likely have a video on the starting lineup as well for Daytona if the weather, of course, holds up. We got content coming out on people like Yeley, Deegan, Chevy and Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, Alex Bowman, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Frankie Muniz, Donald Trump, Matt Benedetto, you name it, all the good stuff dropping really, really soon. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.